I caught my wife kissing her boss's neck at the company party, so I went over to them, my heart racing and my face burning. I touched her shoulder, she turned around, startled, and simply said, "You don't have to explain anything, I just wanted to be sure." I left with the certainty that our end deserved dignity. And it's amazing how, even knowing something's wrong, we insist on not believing. I'd already noticed the looks, her tone of voice when she talked about him, the way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. But blind hope is the last part of the soul to die. It wasn't just about the kiss on the neck. It was about the certainty that fell over me like an entire cemetery being dumped on my back. It had all already happened. That was all that was left of the courage she never had to confess. I wondered how long it had been since she'd seen me. How long it had been since I'd slept next to someone who was no longer there. Maybe all along. I remember the path to the car as if it were made of thorns. Each step was a cut, each breath a confession my body made without permission. The worst of all wasn't the betrayal. The worst of all was the peace she felt afterward. The way she didn't chase after me, as if that end were just a natural chapter, as if I hadn't been love at all, just convenience, just habit. And the greatest pain came from this, realizing that someone who once swore to love me now looked at me as if I were part of an outdated story, a book she'd already closed before I even knew the final chapter was written. In the days that followed, her silence screamed louder than any words. No apologies, no real attempts at repair, just formal messages about bills to pay or objects to collect. Inside, I was torn apart with a dignity that forced me to appear whole. Friends told me I needed to get out, live, meet people. But how do you meet someone new when your heart still lives in a house you've been banished from? The worst thing about betrayal isn't the end of the relationship. It's the end of who you were within that relationship. You don't just say goodbye to the person. You bury the version of yourself that believed in love, that made plans, that smiled when hearing a voice on the phone. I wasn't that person anymore. I became someone else. Someone quieter, more attentive, more suspicious. She tried to stay with her boss. She made no secret of it. Several mutual friends dropped photos, comments, hints of a happiness that seemed too choreographed to be genuine. But I didn't feel envy. I felt something worse, pity. Because I knew it wouldn't last. Because I knew that those who trade love for adventure invariably lose both. He was too vain, too self-absorbed, one of those men who like to collect women like trophies but don't have the patience to live with any of them. And that's exactly what happened. One day, she disappeared from the social media. Total silence. Later, I learned that he had simply moved on, involved with someone else, and that she had been left behind like a mistake he hadn't even bothered to regret. She came to me some time later. Her voice low, her eyes weary. She said she needed to apologize. That I had no idea how much she regretted it, how much she missed who I was. How wrong she had been to believe this new relationship would bring back what she had destroyed within herself. She tried to use our memories as a passport to a new beginning. She talked about our music, our favorite restaurant, the dog we raised together, our travels, our long hugs on rainy Sundays. I listened to it all with a silence that screamed much louder than any words I could have said. When she finished, hopeful, as if she had opened a door that should never have been closed, I simply said, "I forgive you. But that doesn't mean I want you back." She cried. But it wasn't a cry of liberation. It was the cry of someone who knows they've lost what they'll never find again. At the time, I was already meeting someone new. Someone different. No grand declarations, no wild passions. It was something peaceful. A love of presence, of small gestures, of silent complicity. She arrived quietly, but with such a serene light that, little by little, she illuminated all the parts of me that had been erased. She didn't ask for space. She gave me time. And she made me realize that love doesn't have to be loud to be true. It was with her that I understood what it was like to be chosen again, but this time, by someone who had no doubts. She had no need to compare, nor to erase the past. She simply walked beside me, step by step, without haste, without pressure. And in this simple walk, she brought me back to myself. Life went on. My life went on. But hers remained stagnant. My ex-wife tried new relationships, and I found out about it by accident. A mutual friend told me she was frustrated, always comparing the men she dated. Always searching, through new eyes, for the reflection of a love she herself destroyed. That was it. She looked for me in all of them, but she sought me out after losing me. And the problem with cheating isn't just betraying the other person. It's betraying yourself. Because you can fool yourself into thinking you're living something better, but when the excitement fades and reality sets in, what's left is the echo of what you threw away. An echo that reminds you, every day, that what you lost wasn't just a person, it was the chance to be happy with them. I never went back. I never left the door ajar again. I knew forgiveness was necessary, but allowing it to return would be disrespectful of everything I'd endured to move forward. And more importantly, it would be unfair to those who, after myself, rebuilt me. To those who held my hand when everything inside me still trembled. The woman who stands by my side today isn't the trophy of a breakthrough. She's the home I didn't know I deserved. And the greatest irony of all is that when you choose to betray someone who truly loves you, you don't just destroy that love, you destroy any possibility of finding love like that again. Because true love is irreplaceable. It is unique. And when betrayed, it doesn't die. It leaves to be lived elsewhere. In another body. In another story. But it doesn't all end there. One day, years later, she saw me again. By chance. In a small restaurant in the town where we used to go. I was holding hands with my current partner, laughing at something simple, like two teenagers in love. She was alone, with a look that screamed everything her mouth never had the courage to say. A look of longing, of shame, of loss. A look that said, "You were my place, and I chose to leave." But in that moment, none of that mattered to me anymore. Because I was already complete. I was already healed. I was already happy. And she? She finally understood that some choices can't be undone. But what she never knew is what happened that very night, something that to this day I keep to myself. And maybe this is the part of the story that no one expected. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or justified. All the stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry profound truths, and show, unvarnished, how betrayal has the power to destroy lives, feelings, and futures. Get ready. What you're about to hear is intense, realistic, and shocking. Buckle up, and enjoy the story. When Ethan met Olivia, he still carried the weight of his own silences, of failed attempts to find his place in the world, and of nights when solitude was louder than any party. He wasn't an extraordinary man in the eyes of the world, but there was a rare calm about him, a kindness born of respect for the little things. He worked as a systems analyst at a technology company and led a discreet, methodical life, where each routine offered him security. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed to come from a more vibrant world. Communicative, light-hearted, determined, she had the kind of smile that brightened even the cloudiest days and a presence that filled a space naturally, effortlessly. She was the type who, even when silent, said something. Working in the marketing department of the same company, their first contact was through an informal email, which soon turned into a conversation in the hallway, then coffee, then an unpretentious dinner, and before they knew it, they were already immersed in each other. The beginning was as sweet as the memory of an old song. Both came from previous, unresolved relationships, but found a kind of refuge in each other. Ethan was captivated by this spontaneous woman who spoke her mind and laughed without asking permission. Olivia fell in love with his quiet firmness, the way he listened attentively and remembered details, like her favorite book or her childhood fear of thunder. They built everything slowly, unhurriedly, like someone shaping something fragile with their hands. Their first trip together took place 6 months after they made their relationship official. A coastal town, a simple inn, the smell of salt and idle chatter by the sea. They returned certain there was something more between them, something worth cultivating. And so they did. They shared closets, Sundays, and even silences. He cooked on Fridays, she tended the plants on the balcony, he fetched wine, she chose the movie. When they decided to get married, there was no cinematic proposal, just a mutual glance on an ordinary night, where they both knew it was time. The ceremony was simple, intimate, surrounded by people who cheered them on. They lived in a modest but vibrant apartment. They developed their own rituals, coffee in bed on Saturdays, a jazz playlist for dinner, discussions about which series to start, and whispered promises before bed. Things seemed to be in balance. It wasn't a fairy tale, there were bad days, small fights, disagreements about the future, but nothing that made them doubt their love. Olivia, with her intense nature, always sought something more. She wanted to grow, change roles, travel more, get involved in new projects. Ethan admired this in her, but felt comfortable where she was. She never aspired to great positions or notoriety. For him, stability was a virtue. The difference in their rhythms, at first, was seen as complementary. He was the ground, she was the wind. Gradually, however, Olivia began bringing work home more consistently. Quiet dinners were replaced by urgent calls, open spreadsheets in the living room, and late-night meetings. Ethan tried to understand. He even encouraged her. He told her she was at the peak of her career, that she deserved to be recognized, that she was intelligent and deserved to achieve whatever she wanted. She smiled and thanked him, but seemed increasingly distant. Once long conversations became brief. Shared laughter was replaced by a mutual weariness. There was still affection, respect, and an established routine, but something invisible seemed to be taking hold between them. A slowly growing space, imperceptible to the hurried eye, but one that transformed the home into a colder place. Despite this, Ethan believed it was just a phase. All couples go through ups and downs. They still hugged each other when they slept. They still shared the same side of the bed. They still wished each other well. But inside him, something began to ache silently. It wasn't jealousy. It was absence. An absence that felt even with her by his side. He began to notice that Olivia was easily distracted, that she checked her phone more often than before, that she responded with an increasingly frequent, "I'll be right back." She began going out alone to company events, dinners with colleagues, and after-hours get-togethers. She always had plausible explanations. And Ethan wasn't the suspicious type. He preferred to believe. He trusted, or at least he tried. They still maintained an active social life. They went out with friends, attended birthday parties, laughed at Sunday lunches. But as soon as they were alone, the silence would weigh heavily on them again. It was a polite, civilized silence, the kind that seems to respect each other's space but, deep down, screams for attention. Ethan was trying to break that silence with kindness. He made coffee, left notes, suggested short trips to reconnect. Olivia smiled and said she loved that about him. But the promises to reconnect never materialized. The excuse was always time. The time he lacked, the time he didn't allow, the time he demanded. One random late afternoon, she arrived home with a different expression. It wasn't tiredness, it was distraction. Her mind seemed elsewhere, her eyes slow to focus. Ethan tried to talk, asked if something was bothering her. She replied that it was just work, extra pressure, a new project that required more energy. He believed her. After all, she'd never given him any reason not to. But even believing, he felt something slipping through his fingers. He began to rethink his actions, to question if he'd done something wrong, if he'd become too complacent, if he'd failed to praise, to desire, to reinvent himself within his marriage. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe he'd become too predictable. The following weeks were a mix of hope and confusion. Olivia was by turns affectionate, then distant. Some days she returned early, seemingly eager to make up for lost time. They cooked together, drank wine, and laughed as before. On others, she locked herself in her room, headphones on, exhausted beyond sleep. Ethan fluctuated between believing they were fine and sensing something was missing. He had no proof, no confessions, but there was that nagging feeling that something was off. And even without knowing what it was, the pain was already beginning to settle in, silent, persistent, like an invisible crack in a seemingly solid wall. During a dinner with mutual friends, a detail caught his attention. Olivia mentioned a company event with unusual enthusiasm. She talked about new people arriving, about how the environment was being renewed, about the different energy the team was gaining. Ethan watched silently. He saw a glow in her he hadn't seen in his own home for a long time. And although he wanted to feel proud, something inside him shrank. It wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that she was blossoming away from him. That perhaps this new glow had no place in the old love they'd built. Despite this, he remained. He chose to believe in what they had built. In the years they shared, in the vows made with their eyes, in the days when she was his place in the world. And even though he felt something pulling him away from her every day, he remained, because love, sometimes, is this, resisting when everything around seems to want to give up. And it was in this setting, between gestures of hope and silences that hurt, that their story continued. A story where there was still love, but perhaps not the same. Where there was still companionship, but perhaps no longer presence. Where there were still promises, but perhaps no longer intentions. And between the pages of this routine of restrained gestures and unspoken words, something was preparing to break. Something that would change everything. But until that moment, Ethan still believed that love could be enough. He just didn't know that sometimes love endures, but doesn't save. That sometimes love fights, but doesn't win. That sometimes, love arrives too late to stop what has already begun to crumble. The company party took place on a Friday that was too hot for that time of year. Ethan hadn't planned on going. He hated corporate events, especially the ones where he had to smile politely and chat with people who only sought him out when they needed something. But Olivia insisted. She said it would be important to her, that it was a special night, and that she'd be happy if he accompanied her. He hesitated, but went. He put on the shirt she'd bought weeks before and let her straighten the collar with firm, quick fingers. On the way, she was restless. She fiddled with her phone more than usual, typing quickly, smiling to herself. When he asked if everything was okay, she responded with a too automatic, sure, too distracted, as if she didn't want to leave room for questions. They arrived at the brightly lit, overly decorated room, with ambient music, and people talking too loudly. Olivia went to greet her colleagues, walking back and forth with a glass of sparkling wine in her hand, and Ethan stood in the corner, watching, leaning against the bar, trying to look less out of place than he felt. He no longer sought to understand. He simply observed. She was beautiful. Extremely beautiful. As if she had prepared herself not only for the event, but for something he didn't understand. The new dress, the perfume too strong for his taste, the heels higher than necessary. There was an urgent presence about her, as if she needed to be noticed. Ethan no longer recognized that version of her, but he didn't have the courage to face the truth that was already revealing itself in small details. And then, between one song and the next, amid the din of conversation and the clinking of glasses, he saw her. She was leaning against the outdoor area, amid the decorative shadows, across from a man Ethan only knew by sight, but whose face was now too close to hers. His hand rested lightly on her waist, and his lips moved naturally down her neck, as if the gesture were rehearsed, familiar, intimate. Olivia didn't back away. She didn't push him away. She didn't hide it. He just closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if he was exactly where he wanted to be. The ground seemed to give way. Ethan walked toward them as if he were walking through a viscous nightmare, each step demanding an absurd effort. Anger didn't come immediately. It was a mix of disappointment, disbelief, and shame. He touched her shoulder with his fingertips. She turned, startled. Her gaze fixed on him, her lips parted, her face frozen for a second that seemed to last forever. And then he said, his voice firmer than he'd imagined it would be at that moment, "No need to explain anything, I just wanted to be sure." And he left. He didn't run, he didn't scream, he didn't argue. He just left. Because some pains aren't discussed, they're carried in silence. The next few hours were filled with silence and a racing heart. Ethan drove aimlessly, stopping on a random street to breathe. His face burned, not from the heat, but from the humiliation. A cold, dry humiliation that seeped into his pores like a nameless fever. He didn't cry that night. Or the next. He just kept going. He packed her suitcase the next day without rushing, leaving everything organized, like someone sorting a dead man's clothes before burial. When she returned, she tried to speak, but he wouldn't listen. He simply said that what existed between them deserved a dignified end. And dignity, at that moment, was silence. She left with her head bowed, taking with her what remained of a story that until then he had believed to be real. Time passed. Ethan slowly rebuilt his life. He was never the same again, but he allowed himself to live again. He met someone. Someone different, calmer, more present. A silent and stable love, where there were no doubts, no room for ghosts. It was a simple relationship, made of everyday truths and steady hands. There were no games, empty promises, or absent-minded glances. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Olivia, however, seemed to have moved on with her old boss, with whom she exchanged discreet caresses while still wearing Ethan's wedding ring. The story quickly spread through the company's corridors. For a while, she seemed confident. She posted photos, smiles, moments from short trips, as if needing to prove something to herself. But illusions have an expiration date. And when the newness began to weigh on her, when the glances no longer came with the same admiration, she realized what she had done. It wasn't about the boss, nor the newness. It was about everything she had lost the moment she chose someone who never truly chose her. The spark faded. His interest vanished as easily as it had appeared. She tried to sustain the relationship, but realized she was the only one trying. He didn't want a relationship. He just wanted what he had, without a trace, without consequences. When she realized she was alone, the pain began. Regret didn't come as a blow. It came as a slow trickle, day after day. A scent she smelled on the street that reminded her of Ethan. A song that played at the market and brought back a regular Thursday dinner. The lack of his morning texts, the care he took with her allergies, the way he waited for her even when she was late for no reason. It all came back. Not as a memory, but as an absence. That's when she realized, none of the men she tried to get involved with could reach him. It wasn't just about longing. It was about comparison. Involuntary, cruel, constant. She tried to move on, but no one came close to the peace he offered. She began to shy away from dates, from conversations, from herself. Mutual friends noticed the distance. She kept quiet. Because how could she explain destroying her own home on impulse? How could she justify the absence of something that can only be understood when it's lost? One day, on impulse, she sought out Ethan. Months had passed. He answered with a firm voice. She trembled. She wanted to see him. She needed to. And he, out of curiosity or compassion, accepted. They sat in a discreet cafe, far from everything. She spoke slowly, her eyes lowered, her voice choked. She said she'd made a mistake, that she didn't know what she was doing. That she'd confused admiration with desire, novelty with love. She said she thought about him every day, that no other relationship had worked. That she was looking for in him what she hadn't found in anyone else. Ethan listened to her in silence. Out of respect. Because part of him still cared. But nothing about it moved him as before. He thanked her for her sincerity. He said he, too, thought about what they'd been through. But that he had moved on. That there was someone in his life now. Someone who made him feel good. Who loved him completely. And then she cried. Not with relief. But with loss. Real loss. Because for the first time, she understood, he was irreplaceable. And there would be no going back. The betrayal didn't just destroy her marriage. It destroyed the version of herself that truly loved her. The woman who laughed with Ethan, who shared her life with him, who made plans. That woman died the moment she chose another path without looking back. And what was left was someone trying to reclaim what, by choice, she'd let slip through her fingers. She didn't want Ethan back out of love. She wanted him back out of regret. But love had already found another place to flourish. And now she would live with the knowledge that the love of her life hadn't died. He'd simply gone off to live in another story. One where she no longer had a place. Months had passed since that last conversation in the cafe. Time, which stops for no one, followed its course with the coldness of someone who doesn't care about open wounds. Ethan, firm in his decision, stayed away. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect. He had finally understood what it meant to be loved the right way, not out of obligation, nor comfort, but by daily, conscious, loyal choice. Beside the one who now shared his life, he found a light silence, full of meaning, and gestures that spoke more than promises. The days that once seemed gray now had color. He didn't seek distractions, nor quick fixes for the pains of the past. He was whole, present, living without the need to feign stability. He had peace. And this peace was too deep to be exchanged for nostalgia or belated words. It was the kind of serenity that only arises after you've gone through chaos and chosen not to return. The woman by his side, the one who arrived quietly, gradually became the solid foundation of everything he once desired. She didn't try to erase his past, but welcomed it. She was attentive, caring, and even without saying it, he knew she saw a part of him no one else ever bothered to understand. It wasn't a relationship of grand gestures, it was one of constancy. Someone who closed the windows on cold nights, made just the right amount of coffee, knew the name of his favorite book and how he liked his pillow arranged. Little by little, she filled the space that had once been a scar. But unlike other stories, it wasn't to make him forget, it was to teach him that it was still possible to love after being broken. Ethan learned from her that a wounded heart doesn't need to live on the defensive. That true love isn't the kind that requires effort to maintain, but the kind that simply endures. On the other side of the story, Olivia was heading in a different direction. It wasn't a sudden fall, it was a slow deconstruction. Her self-confidence dissolved into small internal defeats. The days became longer, the weekends quieter than before. Her friends gradually drifted away. Not out of malice, but out of discomfort. No one knew exactly what to say, how to react to that version of her that kept quiet at parties and avoided eye contact when she heard his name. She had tried other relationships, yes, but they all ended in the same place, comparison. It was as if every new man unknowingly carried the burden of being better than the one she'd pushed away. And no one was. None were as kind in their way of listening, as present in the little things, as stable without being lukewarm. She couldn't accept it, but it was inevitable, she missed him. But not the idealized man, but the real one. The one who woke up next to her with messy hair and a still drowsy smile. Of writing notes on napkins and saying, "Come back soon," as if each absence was too great. There were nights when she thought about calling. Not to apologize, because she'd already done that, but just to see how he was doing. But she always gave up. What could she say? What was there left to say after all this? So she just watched from afar. She saw photos, bumped into him once or twice by chance, and each encounter was like a silent stab. He was fine. It was obvious. The way he walked, the sparkle in his eyes, the calmness in his gestures. She recognized it because that man had once smiled that way for her. Now, that smile had a different name. A different reason. And it silently tore her apart. At a mutual friend's birthday party, they were both present. It was the first time they'd seen each other up close since coffee. She was more reserved, he more relaxed. Their reunion was polite. A quick greeting, a forced smile. Ethan didn't look away, but he didn't linger either. Just a respectful gesture, without rancor, without any pending issues. But it shattered her. Seeing up close how much he had overcome, how happy and whole he remained, was the final blow. That night, alone at home, she cried like she'd never cried before. It wasn't just longing, it was grief. Grief for everything she'd destroyed with her own hands. Grief for the version of herself that knew how to truly love and now could no longer find. It was at that moment that he realized, brutally, that betrayal doesn't just end marriages. It destroys the possibility of new beginnings. Because some doors, once they close, never open again. And regret, no matter how sincere, doesn't have the power to erase the choices made. Ethan, for his part, moved on with ease. He remarried some time later, in a discreet ceremony, among people who knew his pain and celebrated his personal victory. His new wife looked at him with admiration, but also with reverence. She knew his story, but didn't hold it as a threat. She knew she was beside a man who chose to rebuild himself without losing his essence. Together, they adopted a dog, traveled, and built a home where love was routine, not the exception. He no longer held anger toward the past. He had forgiven Olivia not because she deserved it, but because he needed to let go. He held no grudges, but neither did he carry memories. It was all part of a story that prepared him for the life he truly deserved. And, most importantly, he had relearned to trust. Olivia, in the end, went it alone. She tried to get her life back on track, went back to school, tried to rediscover herself, but there was something about her journey that always pulled her back. It wasn't a lack of opportunities, it was the absence of meaning. Because even surrounded by new experiences, new faces, and possible paths, she never found peace. The weight of having shattered what was whole remained. And no matter how hard she tried to move on, every new attempt was pierced by the shadow of who she was, and who she stopped being when she chose to turn her back on the truest love she'd ever known. One spring afternoon, sitting alone on a park bench, watching couples pass by hand in hand, she finally understood that the cruelest loneliness isn't the one that comes from the absence of company, but from the knowledge that she had everything and threw it away. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced something similar or know someone who has? Leave your opinion in the comments, it's very important to us. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this, intense, moving, and full of profound reflections on love, choices, and consequences. This story shows us that betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships. It breaks invisible bonds, uproots that took years to grow, and leaves a trail of regrets that can't always be healed. Trust, once broken, rarely recovers. And love, no matter how strong, doesn't survive alone. It requires care, truth, and loyalty. Those who choose to betray may even experience a moment of euphoria, but sooner or later they will have to face the mirror, and discover they've lost much more than they imagined. This channel does not support, encourage, or romanticize any type of betrayal. Here, we value loyal love, truth in relationships, and the power of the right choice, even when it requires sacrifice. Until the next story.